one of the things that's happened, at least among a large number of new people in this period of what I say is the virus hoax and the lockdown, is that a lot of people have started to look at the world and think it's not like I thought it was, because a lot of myths have been blown. One of the things that I've been told over the years, again and again, is a few people can't control the world because it's not possible. Well, a few people have actually locked down billions, effectively put them under house arrest in the last few months. So that myth has gone. Of course it's possible. And why is it possible? It's possible only because of human acquiescence, the acquiescence of the population. And what we've seen is people accepting lockdown because they've accepted that there's a deadly virus going around. And they've, on the other side, those who have seen that actually there's something not right with this narrative, but they've still followed the lockdown rules because they fear the consequences of not doing so. And those two motivations for acquiescence have allowed a ludicrously small number of people, lying through their teeth and every other orifice, to put billions under house arrest. And, you know, the question then comes, which relates to your introduction, is how could I have described today's society and much more in my books over the last 30 years and turned out to be so accurate? There's only one reason, that what is happening now is not random. You know, if I can predict all these things happening and they happen, it's either because I'm some kind of prophet, or far more likely that I've managed to uncover a hidden agenda which has been playing out. And what you have, and this is the background to all this, you have two worlds operating in apparently the same world. And they're based on two levels of knowledge. You've got the general population who are given a certain level of knowledge, very, very limited, through the education system, or what passes for it, and through the media, etc. And then you've got this, what I call the global cult, which goes back literally thousands of years. And it is operating with a very different level of knowledge about reality, about where the world's being taken, because it's taking us there, and knowledge of the sequence of events that it's planning to unfold, going way into what we call the future, to transform human society. And every now and again, somebody would tap into this. It might be because they were an insider, or it might be because they've just uncovered it. So this is why Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which came out in the 1930s, is so tremendously accurate in terms of not just current events, but events that are coming if we let them. And George Orwell was so accurate with 1984, which was published in 1948. I've quoted people in my books, insiders, who won in 1969, but predicted how society was going to change in great detail, a Rockefeller insider. And he's been so accurate all these years later. Now, why is this possible? Because there is an agenda, and if you can uncover that agenda and expose it, well, unless something intervenes to stop it, which is the whole point of what I do, that agenda will unfold, and it will appear as if you have accurately predicted the future. What you've actually done is uncovered an agenda which, if left unchecked and unstopped, will become the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And also what I've been thinking about is what most people say is, well, this is just crazy. How could governments be so so evil, right? Why? How could not even governments, but elite people? How could they be so evil? And then I say, how come you trust these people so blindly? When someone comes ringing at your door and you open the door and he wants to sell you something, are you that gullible as well? Do you think, oh, he has the interest of the world, the best interest of the world and of me in his, in his mind? Of course you don't. And why would you do that? Why would you think that people higher up are different than the next guy that you don't know? It's always it's very good to be, not just trusting everyone, but right to just to be not trusting to be trusting everyone will be a very big mistake to make. So why would you question someone who questions authority, right? Because authority is here. Well, I just lost my train of thought, but you know where I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk in many directions about that.
Yeah.
First of all, one of your final points. What the media does is it doesn't question authority. It questions those who question authority.
Right.
My ban from Facebook and my ban from YouTube and my ban from goodness knows what else, even PayPal's banned me. And they're all controlled by the same force. That's why it's coordinated. But media operations like the BBC, so-called independent television in Britain, CNBC in America, have claimed credit for having me banned from those organizations. So you've got the media that should be questioning authority, targeting those who question authority. Why? Because the media is owned by the same people that own the authority. And this is one of the reasons, and I do understand it, why people find it hard to accept that there is a force manipulating human events to create the horrors that we see and have seen decade after decade and generation after generation, be they wars or anything else, because they don't experience that level of psychopathy and what we call evil, which I say is the absence of love, in their own lives. And it's a form of naivety, and it's a very destructive naivety, because this level of evil does exist. I mean, even if you look at the definitions of a psychopath, I mean, people accept psychopaths exist, but psychopaths think that, or people think psychopaths are just all serial killers. No. Right. There are many, many levels of psychopath which manifest psychopathic behavior. And there's a test sequence, which is known as the Hare test, after the man who devised it, of character traits, which if you have enough of them, you are officially considered a psychopath. And the top trait of a psychopath is no empathy, no ability to put themselves in the feelings of those they affect. And once you have no empathy, you have no limits, because we have a fail-safe mechanism in our behavior of empathy, which, because you can put yourself in the feelings of those you affect, that limits the extremes of your behavior. But if you don't have that empathetic fail-safe mechanism, then you have no emotional consequence. In fact, we are looking at a level of pure, undiluted evil that not only doesn't have an emotional consequence for whatever level of horror it perpetrates on the human race, it actually enjoys it. If people see the most extreme of the serial killer psychopath who just kills people and loves it, well, that and then some is the level of psychopathy that's behind this global cult. I mean, I call it the cult because it's a death cult. It literally engages in human sacrifice. I've said that it goes back a long time. This cult goes back to the time when people were sacrificing people openly. It was part of the culture. And then when humanity grew up and rejected that, it went underground, and it's continued. This is why every now and again you'll see stories come to light that are about elite people involved in satanic ritual, etc. It's because it's going on. It's part of their culture. It's like I say, there are two worlds. There's the one the population live in and experience, and then there's the one that this cult lives in and experiences. And the reason that they have this global network of secret societies, which are fiercely compartmentalized. You can be in these secret societies, most of them anyway, not the most elite, and really know nothing about what you're part of, because you only know your little bit, which can seem innocent in and of itself. But you go into the core of this secret society network, and what's happening through the generations is that chosen people are having this agenda and having this knowledge kept from humanity passed on through the highest levels of the secret society network. And this is how you can follow this trail all the way through known human history, coming to the present point where, because of globalization and centralization of power, this cult can now start to seek to seize absolute global control.
Yeah. Yes. What I also want to go, where I also want to go with this interview is what I'm seeing is that the media is finding out that a lot of people are waking up to a certain extent or all the way, and they're struggling with it. That's what I see. And this week I found this article, or it's actually a column written by a journalist for a website I thought I would never quote, because it's a website that is about the identity politics, right, and very much pushing it, the identity politics. But this was actually an article that I thought was worth mentioning. I'm going to leave some things out of it because he is not quite, his reasoning is not quite 100%, so to say. So I am only leaving that which kind of makes sense. And I'm going to read, if you're okay with that, I'm going to read something of it so we can, talk about it. It's called Conspiracy Thinkers. They are them. The eternally not thinking straight other. The flames had not yet burst from the roof of Notre Dame, where the first conspiracy theories were already circulating, writes the Volkskrant. It's a magazine, or actually a newspaper, in May. Is conspiracy thinking on the rise? The newspaper seems to be answering itself. When there are outbreaks of viruses, that is always the case. Well, how many times has this happened, right? Like this? Yeah. Never. But anyway. But how do you weapon yourself against it? Well, not with information and awareness, Bas Heijnen essays in another newspaper, NRC. The conspiracy thinker relies on gut feeling. Can even be attributed to a psychosis. Jelle Havermans here comments on the website that I'm quoting this article from. He has insane opinions. Het Parool, another media outlet, knows. And let it be just the case that we can find these views more often on the nationalist flanks, writes Trouw, another newspaper. Well, there's a lot of diversity in opinions, right, in newspapers here in Holland. It is just a selection of what has appeared recently on the subject, but it shows a trend. Thinking and writing about conspiracy theories is inherently politicized. Conspiracy thinkers, those are them, the eternally not thinking straight other. Rational thinking, after all, that's what we're entitled to, isn't it? Well, no. It is naive to politicize the conspiracy, to interpret the phenomenon only in a social and cultural context, and in doing so, passively dismiss it as untrue nonsense. Moreover, it distracts from an important question that nobody seems to be asking now. What is a conspiracy? Where does it begin? Where does it end? The simple argument is that the conspiracy is a misrepresentation of reality. provably incorrect, and therefore not worth listening to. That may be so, he has to throw that line in. That may be so, and it often is. They always have to do that. But it assumes too easily that there is such a thing as a correct representation. The honest answer is we often do not know. And even if we do think we know how it all works out, it remains to be seen whether we can get to that truth. The existence of statistics speaks volumes. We often cannot get to reality. Yes, Hillary Clinton is the president of the United States, right? And so we approach it based on what we think we know. So the sensible question seems to me not, why is the conspiracy thinker wrong, but why does he believe what he believes? That question is not related to the truth of a theory, but primarily questions the credibility of the argument as a whole. Okay, so I'm going to skip some of it. Here it comes. Okay. Yes. A plausible conclusion that follows from an assumed coherence seen in the available information is how a conspiracy theorist thinks. That has a name, and it reads abductive reasoning. In short, an abductive argument contains a conclusion that follows from incomplete information. That information itself is not so much incomplete, but the abductive argument requires an explanation that is not contained in that information. Whoever links a wet road surface to rainfall is reasoning abductively. After all, nothing about the fact that the street is wet justifies the conclusion that it rained. It is only a fairly plausible explanation. Is that a conspiracy then? No. In fact, abductive reasoning is ubiquitous and often unproblematic. Black holes? Abductive reasoning. Statistical hypothesis? Abductive reasoning. Evolution theory? Abductive reasoning. Are those illegitimate explanatory models for a reality that's hard to grasp? No, they're not. Abductive reasoning usually turns out to be very instrumental. It leads us to explanatory models where the data doesn't. Let that just be the core of conspiracy thinking. Abductive reasoning often goes hand in hand with the simplicity of the explanation. Well, I'm just going to skip this also. So the question seems to me, why is the scientist allowed to use abductive reasoning, but the conspiracy thinker is not? Well, that's a rhetoric question, right?
Well, what's missed when people talk about conspiracies, especially when mainstream media talk about conspiracies and what they call conspiracy theories, because you see, it's a mental connection that's been made between the two words, conspiracy and theory, and conspiracy and theorists. And let's not forget that the terms conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist were brought into widespread use by the CIA in the 1960s. The documents are there to prove it, where they contacted major mainstream media operations in America, urging them to use those terms to discredit people who were not accepting the ludicrous official story of the Kennedy assassination. And so that's where it came from, and the mainstream media are continuing to repeat those terms, having no idea where they actually originated. And what they don't consider is a simple question. This person is saying this has happened or this is happening. The question is, okay, is it true? You don't hear that. If it's different to the official narrative, it must by definition, in their official narrative software program minds, be wrong. And thus it's a conspiracy theory, and they are always wrong. What we see time after time after time after time, not least in my books over 30 years, is what were termed at the time conspiracy theories actually turn out to be true and to happen. But what happens then is the media ignore the fact that you've been right again and again and again. And when you come out with something else, they call you a conspiracy theorist, and what you're saying, conspiracy theory again. So what you have in current times is people in the mainstream media seeking to undermine and discredit me, when what is happening now has been in my books for years that it was coming, but that is completely ignored. Because first of all, you don't have to be intelligent to be a journalist. I was a mainstream journalist for a long time, and I worked with a lot of people at the BBC, in newspapers and radio. And I could tell you there are some bright people in the media, but you don't have to be. In fact, often it's a bad career move if you think for yourself. So you've got that level where they're just programmed. I mean, what is investigative journalism to most journalists? It's reading the morning papers and watching the 24-hour news on the newsroom television. That's investigative journalism. And if you come up with something that is outside the parameters of your media owner's agenda, then it doesn't get in the paper, it doesn't go on air, and if you keep persisting, then you're out the door.
Absolutely.
So what you have is a situation whereby when the mainstream media are looking at things that people like me say, they know that if they show any sympathy for what I'm saying, then they're in trouble with their media operation. So their survival reaction, even if they're bright enough to see beyond the myopia of the mainstream media, and a lot of them aren't, but even those that are, know that if they don't try to trash you in an article or whatever, then they're going to be in some trouble in the newspaper, or it's not going to get in. Well, he's got sympathy with David Icke. What are we doing employing him? This is the way it works, and so what I've never tried to do is convince the media or convince anyone else that what I'm saying is true. People look at it and they decide what they make of it. That's the whole basis of what I do. But of course, what happens is what you're saying has validity, it will be shown to be so, and that's what's been happening to present day. And so it's getting more and more difficult for people in the mainstream media to discredit me, because people looking on two things. One, they say, well, hold on a minute, this guy's been right about so many things. What are you trying to trash him for? And the second thing is, why are they deleting this guy? Why are they targeting this guy? What's he saying? I'm going to have a look. And what's actually happened is that you reach a point where the efforts to discredit and silence you are such that it just increases the interest in what you're doing, which is what is happening to me.
Yes, that's what is happening this year, especially with this lockdown. It has woken up so many people. I think it went from like maybe 20% of the population, and maybe that's even a very positive estimation. It went from 20 to 50%. I believe now that 50% have been investigating all of reality and the governments that we have and the systems that we have and where it is going. And that is why these articles are being written by the media about conspiracy thinkers. They used to ignore it most of the time.
You note, by the way, you note that article you read. You mentioned it yourself, how they threw in lines.
Yes,
and they were lines to protect themselves from what they were writing by not going too far and saying, oh yeah, but this, but that. Because in the end, you cannot keep looking at what is unfolding, how this fascistic global state is unfolding. You cannot go on forever and deny that it's happening. And if it's happening and someone's predicted in great detail what was coming long ago, like 30, 20, 10 years ago, then you put those two together. This was all described all that time ago, and it's happening. You can't go on denying that connection forever. And I'm sure there's a lot of mainstream people in the media now who are very, very frustrated that they can't actually explore these areas, which are becoming more and more blatantly obvious.
Yeah, Absolutely, yeah, and that's what happened. That's what's happening, and that's what you are calling truth vibrations, right? You've always said that word, truth vibrations. That you have actually predicted that in the coming years, when you first woke up, in the coming years, people would be like influenced by something that would make them look at reality differently. Could you talk about that?
Well, it is happening.
Right.
There's no question about that. And
Mm-hmm.
in the 30 years ago, in 1990, when I was having my own awakening, and it was a massive one. And for a while, well, about 3 months, I didn't know what my name was because I went through such a transformation of perception. But in that period, I met a number of psychics, professional psychics. The only one did I actually make the decision to go and see. All the others were just synchronistically coming into my life. You know, if you wanted to meet a psychic in the first few months of 1990, then you should have been following me. You'd have met loads of them, even though I wasn't looking for them. They found me, and there was a common theme that they kept saying to me, I'm being told to tell you this. And it was that a vibrational change was coming that was going to awaken humanity from its coma, its perceptual coma. That the most awake would be affected first, and then those that were more and more in the coma were going to be affected eventually. And that two things would happen. One, that it would act like a spiritual alarm clock to wake humanity up from this perceptual coma. And two, it would have the effect that all that's been hidden from us will be brought to the surface where we can see it. Now, in 1990, there was no evidence for that at all. And there wasn't for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But then it started. And now it's a tidal wave. Because, you see, this cult is in the midst of transforming human society in a way that makes human society completely unrecognizable. And I said years ago that there's going to come a time when this hidden manipulation operating under the radar is going to have to break the surface where we can see it. Because if you are transforming society into a completely different entity and way of life, then at some point you have to break the surface and people can see it's happening. So we are at a point now of tremendous danger because it's got to the point where it's broken the surface and basically walked into the room since these lockdowns, etc. But it's also a time of great danger to the cult because it's now on public display. And so what is happening is this whole truth vibration, if you like, because that's the name I gave to this change, truth vibrations, bringing to the surface all that remained hidden. And when I look back at 1990, when I was told this in the early months of 1990, and then I see what's happened since, look at what we know about how the world's manipulated and to what end that we didn't know then. Look at all the people who are looking at life, reality, the world events, in a different way and questioning things they'd never questioned before. It's happening, and one of the many reasons for social distancing and banning meetings and basically destroying human discourse and interaction, which is what is happening, is to keep people apart because they don't want us to come together in unity and realize what's going on. And realize doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, what your religious preference is, or what your sexual preference is, or any of it. This cult is after all of us. And what it needs to do to achieve that is to divide and rule the target population along all these irrelevant fault lines of race and religion and sexuality. And so it is absolutely no coincidence. It's totally not a coincidence that we have seamlessly gone from this lockdown with the social distancing and everything continuing And they want to bring in another lockdown when we get into the autumn winter months. But it's no accident that right on the end of it, seamlessly, almost overnight, this Black Lives Matter racial discord and division suddenly exploded. Because what is that doing? It's dividing the population. That's what the whole thing is about. And if you don't divide the population, then the population cannot be ruled by a few people. You have to set them at war with each other. And so what we've had through the run-up to all this, in what we call the woke mentality, which is basically another term for fast asleep, is the focus on what has become known as identity politics. Now, what is that? It is subdividing the human sense of the I into smaller and smaller bubbles of self-identity. So now we have this long list of letters describing different self-identities, which are down to the minutiae of self-identity. So you've got men and women, and then you there's been a lot of division on that level as well. But then you start subdividing and subdividing and subdividing and subdividing, and then you've got all these self-identity bubbles of different kinds, which can be played off against each other. So now we have feminists and transgender people at war with each other. It's all about kind of focusing into smaller and smaller self-identities, people's sense of the I am are this, that, or the other. And then it's playing them off against each other. So the target population's at war with itself, and the puppeteers are controlling all sides without the sides even realizing there are any puppeteers. And this is happening before our eyes. And a lot of people, as we've spoken about, are starting to get it. And I started writing a new book in October last year, not knowing any of this stuff was coming in the detail that it unfolded with the pandemic, etc. Although I've talked about the pandemic technique being used against us in books over the years and how that would work. But it's coming out, it's at the printers now, it's coming out in a few weeks, and it's putting it all together. But 85% of it was written before the lockdowns kicked in. And what's happened since, there's a couple of very detailed chapters in there that take the pandemic hoax apart, fact by fact, strand by strand. But what happened is the lockdowns and what's happened since with the riots has actually led to what the first 85% of the book says, that this cult wants to impose upon humanity. So it's still at the printers, and it's being proved correct. Because like I said at the start, there is an agenda, and if you can uncover it, predicting the future, even in some detail, becomes relatively straightforward.
Yeah, it seems that they're in a hurry, because in my opinion, they're moving far too fast. I think it's not very clever what they're doing right now. Doing it so fast, it's like the world in January was totally different from now. And it's only June. So and actually it was totally different from March or April even. And in my opinion, that's only waking more people up. But I guess they are afraid of these truth vibrations. That's just a guess. I don't know if that's true, but I believe that something is happening to our consciousness that is freaking them out. Well, do you think that too?
Two things to that. First of all, there is what the Nazis used to call blitzkrieg, which was basically throwing everything at people in a very short time and basically overwhelming them. Now, that's certainly part of what's going on. And there's more shocks and challenges coming. They'll have a long list of them. to try to create that. It is psychological blitzkrieg that's going on.
Yeah.
But you're right. They know they have, because people are starting to awaken more and more and more, obviously, in greater and greater numbers. They know that they can't hang about. And where they are seeking to take us, and this is their end game, really, certainly of this sequence, is to connect the human brain to artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence becomes the human mind and becomes human perception. No need to manipulate perception anymore. You give it people direct via AI. And people like Ray Kurzweil, the Google executive, and others in Silicon Valley, which I call the devil's playground because it is, are talking about that happening by 2030. Which is a year that comes up again and again and again from every direction. 2030 is a big year for them, or a big target year for all this to come in. But
so what's 2020, right?
Just very quickly, what has happened, as you basically talked about there, is that this has pushed it on, and I do think that there is anxiety that too many people will be awakening in this period to 2030, and it makes them nervous about whether they can pull it off. And so, I mean, another example of that was 9/11. I was saying and writing before 9/11 that I felt that their agenda was behind schedule, that they weren't getting what they wanted quick enough. And that maybe some event would be instigated to advance that agenda quicker. And we got 9/11, which of course did that. So they do have these kind of points where they create events to push things forward, push their agenda on. But I do think they have anxiety. And one of the things that's happening now is they, as I mentioned earlier, they've walked into the room. They're not able to hide anymore. I mean, the real core behind it is hiding in the shadows, but it's gophers and its agents and its players like Bill Gates and such like. They can't hide anymore because they're having to come onto public display with their agenda for their agenda to actually become reality. And it's a very dangerous time for them. I use the analogy of they've walked in the room and they've heard the door click behind them, because they better pull this off now, because there's no going back from their point of view, because they're out in the open to so many people. And the more this moves on, the more people will, simply by the nature of events and what they're seeing, will also start to break out of this perceptual concrete bubble that most people have up to this point lived in.
Yeah. You were talking about artificial intelligence being used and people, fusing with artificial intelligence, that is one of the goals that they have. And in your book, you also talk about how this reality that we actually live in is already a simulation.
Yeah.
And so what they basically want to do is they want to create a simulation within the simulation. Could you talk about this simulation that we are living in? First of all, where did you get that idea from?
Well, what's been happening to me since I had this massive awakening in 1990, 91, is that I get intuitive knowing about something. And then the 5 sense names, dates, places, detail comes into my life that provides factual support for what my intuition is telling me. This has been happening since the early 1990s. And I started to get the feeling around the turn of the millennium that we do live in some kind of simulation. Now, around that time, there was one guy who was really talking about it, virtually no one else, a guy called Nick Rostrom at Oxford University. Not quite in the same way that I look at it, but he was looking at whether this was a simulation. So what then happens is it's like layers. You know, you get information, okay, and you put it aside and wait for more, and then more comes, and then more comes, and eventually you are building a factual, evidential body of information to support what you're saying.
Right.
And what's happened since around, I don't know, 2005, 6 onwards, is more and more mainstream scientists have started to conclude that we do actually live in some kind of simulation. There was a team at the University of Bonn, led by a guy called Silas Bean, who concluded that we do live in some kind of simulation, which they proposed was based on a cube-like matrix. And you've got more and more supporting evidence for this. There was a former scientific advisor to Barack Obama, a guy called Gates, who also led a team that was questioning whether we live in a simulation. And they found mathematics and phenomena in the energetic fabric of our reality, which they say is absolutely the same as what you would find in computers and virtual reality. And then you look at people like Max Tegmark at the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who has pointed out that the mathematics of computer games and virtual reality games is the same as the mathematics of our reality. And as this information just kind of adds on top of more and more information, the picture starts to develop. And then when you then put together the way that we create this reality we think is a physical world, it's not, it just appears to be, we experience it like that, you start to realize that the way that we decode reality is the same as computer games. This reality's foundation nature is waveform information. If people think Wi-Fi, it's absolutely the same principle. And in so many ways, this whole technological world that we are now in is mimicking and mirroring the very reality that we're experiencing, that we call the world. So if you look at the five senses, what they're doing is they're taking waveform information, vibrational information, again, think Wi-Fi. They are decoding it into electrical information, which is communicated to the brain. And the brain then decodes that into holographic digital information. Again, I've been saying since the late 1990s that we live in a holographic universe, or just after that we live in a holographic universe. And now that's becoming more and more mainstream as well.
Yes.
In science, because a holographic digital universe starts to dissolve the mysteries that if you look at it in the classic scientific way, simply cannot be answered. But under the holographic way of looking at the universe, those mysteries can be answered and explained. So if you then take a advanced virtual reality game, what happens? People put the headset on, they put the earphones on, they put the gloves on. And what is happening is the information from the game is hacking into the five senses. And it is communicating to the brain, which then decodes it into a sense of reality, which overrides the reality that we actually would normally experience. So you watch someone with a headset on and all this gear when they're involved in virtual reality. They're sitting in a chair just like this. But to them, their reality is what the game is feeding them. And so people reel back and they're shocked and they scream
Mm.
Well, actually, they're just sitting in a room like this, but to their reality, their perception, they're in a completely different world because of the information being fed through the five senses to the brain in exactly the way we decode reality. So, um, what I'm saying is that the way that we take waveform information and create this reality that we call the world is the simulation. That's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happening with this technological override is
Mm-hmm.
that we are, as you mentioned, what I'm saying is we're overlaying the wider simulation we call the world with an even smaller simulation, which is virtual reality. And so you have this movement now to, I mean, one of the terms they're using is augmented reality. What
Yeah.
does that mean? It's the fusion of the virtual reality technological world with this one. And we're moving more and more into a cyber reality. And when they, or if we allow it, if we're daft enough, ridiculously stupid enough to allow it, then when the brain is connected to AI, that will take us into not only will dictate our perceptions, it will have the ability to take us into these virtual cyber worlds, which override the world that we're currently experiencing.
Yeah. And if this is a simulation, there must be a true world or a true universe,
Yeah.
so to say, right? So where do we come from? Because I believe that I am not part of this simulation. I am experiencing this simulation, but I'm not part of it. I'm actually just like the person wearing those glasses. I am hacking into it, or I'm actually, how do you say that? I'm downloading it, like downloading my consciousness into it.
Yeah, where does what the simulation is, as with virtual reality games, is simply an information source.
Yeah.
You know, if I've got a computer in front of me and it decodes, say, Wi-Fi. It decodes Wi-Fi, which is a field, basically a waveform radiation field of information. And it decodes that information and puts it on the screen in front of me in a completely different form to how it is in the Wi-Fi field. And that's what we're doing. So the simulation is not a physical thing which we kind of get inserted into. The simulation is an information source which we're decoding, just like a virtual reality game. And what we are, the I, is consciousness. We're not the body, that's the vehicle to experience this reality. This is why race and all this other stuff is so bloody irrelevant. And once you start to self-identify with the nature of your body, I am black, I am white, I am Jewish, I am transgender, whatever, then you are focusing your attention, your self-identity, into the five senses. This is, and therefore you are disconnecting the influence of the true I, which is consciousness. See, when people in their millions and millions, have described their near-death experiences when the body ceases to function for a short time, and that their consciousness is released. I explain in my new book, The Answer, how that works. And then they experience a completely different reality. Suddenly their awareness expands. They can experience what we call past, present, and future in the same moment. Everything expands, and they experience multiple realities in the same now. And then when they get pulled back into the body, as the body is revived, then they experience this reality. Why? Because this body, I've been calling it since the 1990s, a biological computer. This body computer decoding system focuses our attention within a tiny band of frequency called visible light and the electromagnetic spectrum. The electromagnetic spectrum is reckoned to be about 0.005% of what exists in the universe. And visible light, which is the only reality we can see, is a smear of the 0.005%. So we're actually experiencing an incredibly narrow band of experience perception called visible light. It's almost infinitesimal in terms of what exists in the wider infinite reality. And this is what we call the world, this narrow band of frequency. It's like being, on a particular television channel, and that you're only aware of that channel when actually all the other channels are all around you in the same space, but they're not on a frequency that you can access. So the body focuses our attention and our decoding mechanism within this band of frequency. And if you are only aware of or focused upon the five senses, then that's your reality.
Yeah.
And that's all you'll experience. And where are you going to get your information from and your perceptions from and your intuitive knowing from if you only operate within that band of frequency? You're going to get it from the education system and the mainstream media and so on, and peer pressure that operate in the same narrow band. But when you start to awaken and you expand your consciousness beyond that five sense only level of perception, then you start accessing other levels of consciousness which give you a greater insight and point of observation of the world that you are actually experiencing. And then instead of being in the world and of it, you become in the world because you're operating through a body that's interacting with this frequency band, but your perception expands beyond it. So you're in the world, but you're not totally of it. And those people start to see things that those people don't see, not because they're better or this or that, the other, but because they're just perceiving in a different way. So if you're in this narrow band of frequency, what you're basically looking at all the time is dots, and they appear random, and they appear to be why is that happening? Why is that happening? That's it. But when you symbolically and literally expand your awareness into the greater consciousness, now you are starting to connect dots. Now you start to see patterns and not just pixels. You see pictures, and the world looks totally different. And that's what happens when you awaken, and anyone can do it. It's just a choice. And you see, what is awakening? Awakening is merely to remove the levels of programming that dictate your perception. In other words, you start to question things you haven't questioned before. Because if you don't question anything, then your whole reality is basically given to you by official sources. And that's it. That's your reality. So in this whole pandemic period, those that are in that mode have simply accepted what the government says, governments and authorities say about this so-called virus, whereas other people have said, well, hold on a minute, let's ask some questions about this. Actually, what they're telling us here and what they're telling us here, they're contradictory. They don't make any sense. What's going on? That's what happens when you start to question and open your mind instead of having it turned into basically a press enter software program by authority.
Yeah. What would happen to this reality that we live in if all of us, or let's say the majority of us, choose to not be into the little me, but into the big consciousness that we are? What would happen to this? Because it is a simulation, but I also believe that it only can exist because we put our consciousness into it.
We decode it.
Right.
Yeah. If we stop decoding it, then it won't exist. If you stop decoding a virtual reality game, then the virtual reality game may exist in its informational form, but because you're not decoding it from its informational form into its virtual reality form, the virtual reality form doesn't exist. We are creating this world by decoding it. But the thing is that this is an interactive simulation.
Yeah.
We are affected by the information source. Like, you've got a computer. You what makes you decide where you go on the internet compared with someone else? Your perceptions. So you go on, and your perceptions decide, I'm going here in the Wi-Fi field, and I'm going to put this part of the Wi-Fi field on the screen. But so what you're doing then is getting the information from the simulation on your screen. But you can also post onto the simulation, onto the Wi-Fi field, and change the Wi-Fi field that way. So it's an interactive virtual reality game that we're involved in, even in computers. And like I say, this all just is a mimicking, mirroring of reality that we actually are experiencing and we call the world. So the more that our perceptions change, the more what we post on the internet changes, and the more the Wi-Fi field changes. In the same way, the more our perceptions change in this reality, the more we are affecting the what I call the cosmic internet Wi-Fi field, and we're changing that. And this cosmic internet field is basically a sea of information on a waveform level, which we are interacting with all the time. You know, if you look at reality on another level, there's not space between me and that wall or me and this computer. There is vibrating energy. We're all connected through this vibrational field, which I call the field. And that field is influencing us. This cult is constantly trying to control that field. And the more it can control human perception, the more human perception is transferred into the field, and then the field is fed back to us in a feedback loop that affects us. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more people awaken, the more they impact on the field in a very different way. Then the more the field changes to represent that, and the more people are therefore affected by those changes in the field. See, it's not just that people are awakening more and more because of things that they see or information that they come across. That's certainly part of it. It's also because this energetic sea is also changing, because everyone that awakens is putting a different perceptual field, a different frequency, if you like, into this cosmic sea that connects us all. And so as that changes, as people change, so the sea is affecting us in a different way. This is where the truth vibrations change is going on, actually, in this sea of energy. So question, how do you change, or how do you affect all the fish at the same time? You affect every individual fish? No. You change the sea. You affect the sea. And the sea will affect all the fish at the same time. And that's the interaction and the dynamic of this field and anything connected to the field, i.e. humanity. And so animals who don't go through this programming of perception, they are therefore much more sensitive to this field than we are, although we can become very sensitive to it. But most people are not, because they're withdrawn from it into the five senses. But this is why animals have these senses that something is happening. You know, scientists have asked, how do some animals and other you know, forms of life, how do they obviously know by their actions and reactions that say a earthquake is coming? How do they know that? Because as this, the if you like, physical earth movement is moving towards that, there are changes in the field. And these animals are interacting with this field in a very sensitive way, and so they feel and recognize changes in the field, and they know something's coming. Lots of animals have these senses because they're not programmed out of them by the human education system and the human media and human peer pressure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, we can change this reality. We can with our consciousness, only being more conscious, of course. Have you ever heard about the Mandela effect?
Yeah, I've come across that.
Yeah, it would explain, that some people experience strange things that are changing that couldn't change in physical reality, but that's happening because of changes in the simulation that might be affected by our consciousness. That's how I perceive it.
Well, like I said, it's affecting us. If you're
Yeah.
only operating on a 5 sense level,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically like going into a boxing ring with your hands by your sides. You're at the mercy of the information that
Yeah.
you receive, not just direct through the media and education and stuff, but actually from the field that you are unknowingly interacting with all the time. But when you awaken beyond the 5 senses, and you start to expand your consciousness into what is potentially infinity, then you start to impact upon the field instead of the field completely impacting upon you, and so you start to change the field. And basically, you've lifted your fists from your side, and now you've got the power to affect your reality, because our perceptions, our emotions, and our thoughts that together make up our perceptual state
Mm-hmm.
are all frequencies. So your perceptions represent, whatever they may be, a range of frequency. Joy and hate, love and depression are very different frequencies. These things like depression, etc., and anxiety, they're very slow, low frequencies which do not vibrate energy very quickly. And basically, it slows down. And what do people say in those circumstances? Oh, I feel so heavy today. It's because the energetic field is so slow because of the frequencies that you are generating. When you feel joy and happiness and love, you say, oh, I feel so light today, because they're very quick frequencies. And so we are sending out these frequencies into the field on the basis of our perceptions.
Yeah, which others are receiving also.
Others are receiving, being affected by, and we're being affected by them. But the point is, we're interacting with this field. And if you imagine this field is like a Wi-Fi field, and in the same way that your perceptions dictate where you go on the Wi-Fi field and what part of it you put on the screen, so your perceptions in the wider world are dictating what parts of this field you're interacting with. So if for instance, you have a perception that you have no power, you are little me, and I know my place, then that is a frequency, a band of frequency that is representing that state of perception. So what you're going to do is you're going to interact with the field within that band of frequency, and you're going to create a feedback loop in which the field will feed back to you that perception in experience. So your little me, I have no power perception creates this feedback loop, and what comes back to you in that loop are experiences, just like taking a part of a Wi-Fi field and putting it on the screen. You are given experiences, you're giving yourselves those experiences, which support the self-fulfilling prophecy that you have no power and you're just little me. And you'll see, oh, look, look, I've got no power. Look at my life.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start to change your self-identity from, for instance, I am my label, I am white, black, Jewish, Muslim, transgender, whatever, you see those labels not as who you are, but simply what you're experiencing in a very short period we call a human life. But the real I is consciousness, and ultimately it's a point of attention within an infinite flow of consciousness. So we're all each other. We're just different points of attention, different perceptual points of attention within the same consciousness, which makes all this, racial division ludicrous on all sides, by the way. So your I goes from I am, someone driving a bus or someone working on the checkout at the supermarket, to I am a state of infinite awareness, having that experience. And what that redefinition of self-identity does is it unleashes or releases you from the five sense perception. I am someone driving a bus. I am someone working on the checkout. That's all I am. So, okay, that's all you are. I am infinite awareness, having that experience. Now, that expansion of self-identity is simply then expresses itself in an expansion of your mind into greater and greater levels of consciousness. Now, instead of interacting with the field, the Wi-Fi field, if you like, in this narrow band of I have no power, I'm just little me, now you're interacting with it in a much more expanded way, a much more high frequency way, and suddenly you're creating a feedback loop, which is, in terms of the experiences that you are basically generating by your perceptions, and your life is dramatically different to someone who thinks I'm little me and I'm just my job and I'm just my life story, I'm just my labels. And suddenly, this is why when people awaken, when they start to awaken, and lots of people watching this will recognize this in their lives, certainly happened to me, suddenly you get this synchronicity in your life. All these coincidences started to happen. Oh my goodness me, what's the chances of that happening? What's the chances of meeting you here? All this suddenly starts to happen, which wasn't happening before, because now you are interacting with possibility and probability, the field, in a much more expanded way. And so much more expanded experiences can be manifested. And it's what has happened? All you've done is transform your self-identity from I am my labels to I am the consciousness having an experience called my labels. And if you look at what the cult is doing, my goodness me, does this apply to present time? They are pressuring people and encouraging people to identify with labels. I am black. Black lives matter. And I am black and you are white. I am transgender and you are feminist. You are gay. You are straight. All these labels, they're just experiences. But what they're doing is pressuring people to self-identify with them. And if you self-identify on that level, you get pulled into the five sense perceptual prison, which is what this is really all about.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Well, it's been a fascinating talk. We've already gone over the hour.
Okay.
It's fascinating. We could go on forever, but I think you have to also go on with your day.
Yep.
I think it's actually dinner time, right, in England right now.
Well, we call it tea time. I suppose dinner time. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, but it's been really fascinating, and well, actually, we talked about a lot in just a very short while. So I think even the viewers and listeners will need some time to digest this all, I guess. So I see behind you, I see the word iconic.com.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Iconic is something that my son Jamie created, and I'm absolutely delighted with it. It's a media platform. We basically had the idea. Jamie had the idea, but we really went for it because we could see all the censorship coming, which kind of it has. And it's a media platform with now well over 700 videos, series, documentaries, and so much cutting edge information across the whole swathe of subjects, by the way. And people can take a 7-day free trial on that and see what they think of it. In a few weeks, Iconic, because we make a original content, Iconic will be launching a full-length, feature-length documentary, which was shot in a number of countries, including New Zealand and the United States, called Unnatural. And Unnatural is all about the impact upon humans psychologically and health and in many other ways of this electromagnetic smart technology and 5G and all these things. We're also in the process of starting to film another feature-length documentary called Lethal Injection, which is about the dangers of vaccines. And you know, all my information over the years, all my presentations and what have you, are all on Iconic, and I do a 90-minute run through of the news from another perspective, what it really means, every Friday. So there's a hell of a lot of information there, and there's davidicke.com, of course, which is the site that people can go to every day, and all my videos are there, and all the news stories put into the context of what's really happening. And there's also my BitChute video channel. BitChute, if people haven't come across it, is YouTube without the censorship.
Right.
And so people can subscribe to that and get my videos as they go up. So there's lots of things happening. And like I say, I've got this book at the printers now called The Answer, which will be out in a few weeks. And if I'd have picked a moment when that book should come out, it would be when it's coming out, given what's happened. And
right.
I started writing it in October, and my goodness me, how perfectly timed it is.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable what's happening, but it's actually good that it is happening, because it was time for us to see what is really going on, and a lot of people have now seen that.
That's for sure.
Yes.